Shalom and welcome, family. I'll be your host today for today's discussion. My name is Adiel, and I am here on behalf of the Universal Temple of Yahweh. Today's discussion is something that's been on my mind for at least a few weeks, and I believe the Creator saw fit for me to give you this message so that we do not lose sight of our core directive, so that we do not get caught up in all of the happenings of the world and all of our own personal desires, and we remain focused and steadfast on the task at hand. So we're going to go ahead and start today's class with the Lord's Prayer in Hebrew. Those of you who've been around for a while have heard us say this all the time. You probably know it yourself. But the reason why we do the Lord's Prayer in Hebrew collectively, when we pray collectively, is because we need to have a collective will. We need to have a will that is Bible-centered, Bible-driven, right? And it needs to address the needs of us as a nation. And it needs to remove all of our own personal and individual desires out of the equation. So this is why we have a collective prayer that we do as a whole. So let us go ahead and begin the Lord's Prayer in Hebrew. Tefillah. Abenu Sheba Shemayim Yikade Shemeaka Tavo Makuteaka Yaze Rizonka Kiba Shemayim Kain Be'aretz Elekem Kukenu Tain Lanu Hayon Uslak Lanu All Katienu Kimoshiso King Gamanaknu Lykotam Lanu Veal Tefienu Ladeni Sayon King Alsenu Minhara Kilaka Hamalaha Beagivara Beatifiereth Leolame Olamim Sila. Today's class will be a shorter class. I don't want to keep anybody too long. I have prior engagements later, but it is important to put the Creator Yahweh first. So you're going to go ahead and get this class today. This one's going to go from Old Testament and New Testament here. So, and I'm careful, like I said, about what I choose from the New Testament. Those of us who have been here for a while and studied for a while understand why. If you know, you know. But there are some important things in here that tie directly into the Old Testament and tie into the importance of, the so-called Old Testament. We're going to start with Mark chapter 3. Mark chapter 3, verse 27. And it reads, "No man can enter into a strong man's house and spoil his goods, except he will first bind the strong man, and then he will spoil his house." So we have to understand that in the parables that Yehoshua taught, the purpose of the parable and the reason it was structured as it was is so that you could learn multiple lessons with just one parable, right? It could be looked at in different ways, and you become more knowledgeable and you become more aware of different things, not simply the lesson that was intended to be taught at that time, but lessons that would later appear. So in this particular verse and some of the ones you'll see later, this idea of the strong man, I'll tell you now, it sort of represents one half of the dichotomy of leadership in a person's household, in your life, and obviously in the assembly of the children of the Creator Yahweh, right? In your temples, your churches, however you want to put it, okay? So here the strong man specifically, right, represents the whole word, the laws, the statutes, the judgments, and commandments of God, Yahweh, okay? And the contents of the house. We know what his house is, right? Everything that it, resides underneath, the goodness and the righteousness of the Creator Yahweh. So it represents the authority and the people, right, of the word. Could be, in one sense, the next generation of those who believe. And what we see this verse saying here in Mark 3:27 is that you cannot enter into a strong man's house and spoil his goods. That's to say, everything is valuable within that house, unless you first bind him. Okay? So, what does this mean? I'm sure many of you who have been paying attention, who've not been living in a rock, can understand that the dominion, right? The authority of the people of God Yahweh has been stripped away. That there are many invaders, many aliens, many strange women, right? Strange ideologies that have been creeping in and entering into the tabernacle of the Most High Yahweh, right? And we can step it back and we can relate this to the churches. Those of you who visit churches, you understand very well that your churches are under attack from ideologies that are not consistent with the legacy of the Bible, the book, your beliefs. And I don't need to go into any specifics of what we're talking about. Those of you who are listening, you know what I'm talking about. But it's not something that the leadership of churches can really cry about, because they've been spending generation after generation after generation binding the strong man. You see, there's two halves of everything. There is the strict, there's the exactness, and then there's the letter of the law, right? This is like the strong man. You don't necessarily, you're not too thrilled to hear him talk, but you need his instruction, you need his guidance, and you need the boundaries that he sets, right? We love the nurturing, soft, and sweet words of our mother. And much like this, the church has spent a lot of time binding the strong man. They've been undermining the authority of God's commandments and his laws. And some of you are like, oh, no, they haven't. Yeah, yes, they have. If you wholeheartedly accepted the commandments, the laws, statutes, and judgments of God Yahweh as found in the book of the law, rather than making statements like we're under grace and no longer under the law, right? If you were not doing that, then the boundaries of what is permitted and what is not permitted would be very clear, and there would be no argument about that, right? So you could not have people that are unmeet, that are ideologically unmeet, come into your assemblies and bring strange and unmeet ideologies to your flock, right? The Bible is very clear about some of those ideologies, and it is not a thing of hatred of the person, but again, the rules of the book are very clear. This is permitted, this is not permitted. That's the role of the strong man. But again, we don't necessarily like the strong man when we're young and foolish. We want the sweet, soft words of our mother. So we've bound him up, and the sweet and soft and often compromising nature of the mother has taken precedence in the church. And so now you have all these things that you have to contend with that should not have been the case had the strong man been in place. You have your young being swept away with all these different ideologies. And part of the reason is that they don't have those set in stone boundaries and rules and laws by which to live. One cannot say something is sinful. One cannot say something is unseemly without having a established law, right? Because sin is transgression of the law. And if no one is under the law in the church, then no one is subject to the accusation of sin. This is a very simple thing that seems to be lost upon a lot of our people. Okay? I want to go ahead and relate this particular verse to something else. 2 Peter chapter 3. 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 16 and 17. This is something else. Much of the doctrine that you find in churches, and I have to talk about churches because the fact of the matter is that all of us who are Hebrew Israelites, well, not all of us, but all of us or our parents, right? They all eventually came, they came from the church or some other movement, and they came to this understanding. But I have to make it aware that, this is important to relate back to this because, that was sort of the origin prior to our current understanding and our current knowledge, right? And our current state. Many of the doctrines were based on Pauline teachings, right? Teachings that came from Paul or the associates of Paul, Saul, as many of you will regard him. And the teachings that came from Peter, came from John, came from James, right? The actual disciples have been kind of pushed to the wayside. But Peter gave a warning. And in verse 16, it says, as also in all his epistles, and by his, he's referring to Paul, speaking in them of these things, in which are some things hard to be understood, which they that are unlearned, and this word unlearned means people who are not experienced in the law, who don't understand the law, and unstable. This word unstable here, it means people that are vacillating, people that are unfixed, people that are not standing firm in something, right? Rest. Rest here means to twist and contort. It means to take out of context. So let me start that over. In which are some things hard to be understood. That means misunderstood. Which they that are unlearned in the law and unstable, they twist, they wrest, as they do also the other scriptures. Meaning, people who do not understand the law, who are not firm in the law, are going to listen to the things in Paul's teachings and they're going to twist them. They're going to take them out of context as they do other things within the scriptures. Read this. 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 16 is very clear. They're going to take Paul's teachings out of context. They're going to take the other scriptures out of context. And to what end? I'm going to continue. As do they also, the other scriptures, unto their own destruction. Verse 17. Ye therefore, beloved, seeing ye know these things before, beware lest ye also being led away with the error of the wicked, fall from your own steadfastness. Meaning, he's warning you about these things. There are things in the teaching of the New Testament that are, in this term here, hard to be understood, means something that's misunderstood, that's often misunderstood, something that isn't quite clear. There are things that are not quite clear that people who do not understand the law, right? They don't understand the entirety of the law. They're going to misunderstand those things, right? The law is not something that we as a people were taught. They're going to misunderstand those things in the New Testament. They're going to misunderstand other verses, and ultimately it will lead to their destruction. This is the warning that he's giving here. And thus, we see this right now. We see assault after assault from different angles. And due to political reasons, right? I don't really like to use the term political correctness, but you can say political correctness. And really it's for legal reasons. Many in the church leadership have their hands tied when it comes to these things. This would not have been the case had the strong man not been bound. For generations, we have been undermining the importance of the law. And had the law been in place, these things would not have occurred. Okay? So there's a parallel here when we look at Luke chapter 12, verse 39. Luke chapter 12, verse 39, and it reads, "And this know, that if the good man of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not have suffered his house to be broken through." So there's a couple of things that this means. Obviously, within the context of this chapter, it has something to do with the coming of the Son of Man, not knowing when he's going to come. But if you take it outside, right, this particular verse, outside of the context of the entire chapter, again, like parables, they have multiple meanings and multiple teachings. You can see something else that's important. It has to do with the idea of watching and being prepared, right? And, accepting a responsibility, not shirking responsibility. So as a good man of the house, a strong man of the house, he who has the responsibility of watching over the house, if you knew when the thief was going to come, you would have watched and you would not have allowed him to destroy the house. And this, again, relates to 2 Peter 3:16, Mark 3:27, and that you have lots of false teachers, right? And they were allowed to come into the house, and they were allowed to break through the house, right? Destroy the goods of the house, lead people astray. And all that came about because of lack of the understanding of the laws, statutes, judgments, and commandments of God, Yahweh. If you understand that, you understand those who are false teachers. As I stated here, that the law is the strong man, the good man, that sets the boundaries and rules by which the house operates, right? So it sets precedence for how the assembly of God is to operate. There's no question. There's no debate about it. It's not a democracy. It is a theocracy. It is a theocracy ruled by the laws of God, Yahweh. Okay? But we've had this long-standing precedent of undermining the laws of Yahweh because in the seminaries and in the Bible schools, they have not taught the law. They have been antithetical to the law. And it was for their purpose that they did this. And so all of our teachers in our communities, I'm speaking to the so-called Black men of America, and to a greater extent other people in the world and in America, our teachers have not regarded the law. And they've rejected it for so long that they can no longer, in good faith, invoke the law in order to defend themselves against these invaders, these alien ideologies, because it becomes hypocritical. You spent so long dismissing the law that now you need to run to it to use it. So let us go into the Old Testament a little bit. Psalms chapter 19. Psalms chapter 19, 7 through 14. And it reads, "The law of the Lord Yahweh is perfect, converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord Yahweh is sure, making wise the simple. The statutes of the Lord Yahweh are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord Yahweh is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord Yahweh is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord Yahweh are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold, sweeter also than honey and the honeycomb. Moreover, by them is thy servant warned, and in keeping of them there is great reward. Who can understand his errors? Cleanse thou me from secret faults. Keep back thy servant also from presumptuous sins. Let them not have dominion over me. Then shall I be upright, and I shall be innocent from the great transgression. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Yahweh, my strength and my redeemer." Hallelujah, Yahweh. So that said it all. That said it all. I tell you, that related directly to what we were talking about. It's through those laws, through his commandments, through his judgments that we're warned, that we're made aware of the thief, right? And of the robber. We know what he looks like. Specifically, like I said, verses 11 and 12 in there, you can go back and that relates directly to what we were talking about. Psalms chapter 71. Psalms chapter 71. I'm just going to read a couple verses here. Psalms chapter 71, verse 2 and 3. "Deliver me in thy righteousness, and cause me to escape. Incline thine ear unto me, and save me. Be thou my strong habitation, whereunto I may continually resort. Thou hast given commandment to save me, for thou art my rock and my fortress." See, the commandments were given to save you, right? Not to burden you, not to bind you down, but to save you. Psalms 111. Psalms 111, verse 7. The works of his hands are verity and judgment. All his commandments are sure. The word sure here is aman, meaning they support you, right? They establish you, they carry you, they cause you to be stand firm. We have the entirety of Psalms chapter 1. Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, right? Nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord Yahweh, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. The ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind driveth away. Therefore the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord Yahweh knoweth the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish. And this verse is beautiful because it tells you what would happen if you remain faithful and within the law, and you meditate in that, is that the sinful cannot stand in your congregation, right? They can't stand there. And finally, in wrapping up, we're going to go ahead and just take a look at Deuteronomy. And this is beautiful. Honestly, family, if you don't periodically go back and read Deuteronomy chapter 20, the entirety of it, right? Not just to make points to people about certain things, but just kind of read it. You really miss out on the beauty of how our Father, right, the Creator, Yahweh, foresaw all of this, and he gave us warning in the law of what would be if we kept the law and the commandments, right, and covenant, and what would be if we did not. And specifically, Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 15 through 68, right? That gives us all of the consequences if we did not keep it. And I'm not going to go through all of that because I'm looking, like I said, there's a lot of verses. But one of the takeaways that you see here is that everything that we produce, right? That means like our financial wealth, material wealth. It means our children, right? The happiness that can be produced from our works. All of these things would be snatched up from us if we don't keep his commandments, if we reject the covenant. So, we come and we spend our lives, we kind of devote our lives to our faith. And then we have children when we half step and we don't keep the covenant, we don't keep his laws, and we believe that we are keeping the faith, right? And what winds up happening is that our youth, the fruit of our labors, is stolen away from us. And that is found in Deuteronomy chapter 28. And it's not just about it is not just about having faith. And that's part of the problem is that people believe that that's all it is. It is not that. It is having both the law, the commandments, and it is having the faith. In Revelation chapter 14, as I see here, I'm just going through the Bible here. Revelation chapter 14, verse 12. John the Baptist says, here is the patience of the saints, right? Here is the patience of the saints. Patience means the steadfastness, the constancy, the endurance. This is how they would be endure, right? This is how they would remain steadfast, right? This is how they would sustain themselves. He's very clear in Revelations. You can read it, Revelations 14 and 12. He's talking about keeping both the commandments of God, Yahweh, and the faith of the Son. He's talking about both these things, not one or the other by themselves. He's saying both. As you know, unfortunately, the church has rejected one of these. The one that came first, the commandments of God, Yahweh, they generally reject those. So keep this in mind, family. Keep in mind that within your own homes, within your own congregations, unloose him, unbind him, and willingly accept the authority of the strong man back into your lives. And it's with this that all the things we talk about here in the universal temple of Yahweh, all the health, all the prosperity, right? You know, all the laws about health, they're in the Old Testament. All the laws about prosperity, they're in the Old Testament. It is intentional that the thief comes in to bind the strong man because he does not want you to have these things. He'd rather have them for himself. He rather take these things from you. All the things that we have taught and preached to you are in the law, and you must unbind the strong man. You must unloose the good man and allow him to lead in your lives in order for you to get these things. Understand, family, as his elect, your job, as it states in Ecclesiastes, your job is to serve the Lord Yahweh and to keep his commandments. That is what separates you from all other nations. That is what makes you worthy in his eyes, and that you are obedient to him. David was chosen over Saul because David was obedient. Saul was obedient to men, but David was obedient to Yahweh. Keep this in mind, family. Familiarize yourself with the law. You must understand the law. Love the wife of thy youth. Love the word. And live your life by it. All that being said, thank you, family. I will let you all enjoy the rest of your day. It has been my pleasure. Aniyahab. Shalom Aleikum.